Chapter 14. In England Again, Fighting the Stamp Act. After a swift but stormy 30-day passage, Franklin reached London on December 10, 1764. He set himself to work immediately on his assignment, maneuvering again through the press and through some of his contacts in the royal government. He had high hopes for success. Just 2 months after his arrival, he wrote to his wife, "A few months, I hope, will finish affairs here to my wish, and bring me to that retirement and repose with my little family so suitable to my years, and which I have so long set my heart upon." But he was to be disappointed in these expectations, as George III's Privy Council were unwilling to act on the Pennsylvania Assembly's petition to dissolve the proprietary government in the colony. They took the position that it would be improper for the king to come between the proprietors and the people in their dispute. Even though Franklin continued to work toward his object for several more years, the matter was never actually resolved until the American colonies separated themselves from Great Britain altogether in 1776. In the meantime, an issue of even larger significance suddenly overshadowed Franklin's original mission. British taxes had risen sharply as a result of the recent 7 Years' War. As early as March 1764, some of the king's ministers had devised a plan to raise revenue among the American colonists in order to alleviate this burden. They proposed that the Americans be required to purchase government-issued stamps to be placed on all legal documents, newspapers, pamphlets, almanacs, advertisements, and many other articles which were sold or distributed within the colonies. When Franklin learned of this plan, he knew his countrymen would object to it as a tax levied directly by Parliament, in which they had no representation. Up to this time, the colonial assemblies had voted their own taxes to provide revenue specifically requested by the Crown. He therefore decided to do whatever he could to prevent the implementation of this ill-fated scheme. In February 1765, he met with the Minister of Finance, George Grenville, and tried to dissuade him from submitting the stamp proposal to Parliament. He recommended instead that revenue be raised from the colonies in the usual constitutional way. Failing in this effort, he collaborated with Thomas Pownall, former royal governor of Massachusetts, in proposing an alternate plan. But Grenville would not be diverted. "I took every step in my power to prevent the passing of the Stamp Act," said Franklin, "but we might as well have hindered the sun's setting." The bill was brought before the House of Commons and passed on February 13th. American resistance to the Stamp Act was even greater than Franklin had expected. Besides forming the Stamp Act Congress in May 1765, the colonists had engaged in rioting, smuggling, and boycotts of some British goods. The stamps themselves were generally ignored, and many of the officers appointed to enforce the act resigned under threats of their lives. Franklin was amazed at the rashness of the Assembly in Virginia, which had approved Patrick Henry's inflammatory resolutions against British oppression. "I hope, however, that ours will keep within the bounds of prudence and moderation," he wrote to a friend in Pennsylvania, "for that is the only way to lighten or get clear of our burdens." A firm loyalty to the Crown and faithful adherence to the government of this nation, which it is the safety as well as honor of the colonies to be connected with, will always be the wisest course for you and I to take, whatever may be the madness of the populace or their blind leaders, who can only bring themselves and country into trouble and draw on greater burdens by acts of rebellious tendency. Because he spoke for moderation, Franklin was accused by his political foes in Philadelphia of having urged the passage of the Stamp Act, or at least having favored it, in order to secure some profitable government post. Some even charged that he had drafted the bill himself. During the summer of 1765, a group of citizens who had been influenced by the propaganda During the summer of 1765, a group of citizens who had been influenced by this propaganda threatened to burn the newly completed Franklin home on Market Street. William, now in his 3rd year as governor of the neighboring province, tried to bring his mother to New Jersey for protection, but Deborah refused to budge. She invited 2 of her male relatives to move in temporarily and to bring guns with them. "We made one room into a magazine," she explained in a letter to her husband. "I ordered some sort of defense upstairs, such as I could manage myself." The rioters soon lost their bravado and decided it would be unwise to tangle with Mrs. Franklin. After learning of this incident, Franklin wrote his wife that he was proud of her spunk. "I honor much the spirit and courage you showed and the prudent preparations you made in that time of danger," he told her. "The woman deserves a good house that is determined to defend it." He also reacted characteristically to the unkind accusations of his political enemies, as shown in a letter to Joseph Galloway, a close associate in the Pennsylvania Assembly, who had also been implicated. "I received a copy of that lying essay in which I am represented as the author of the Stamp Act, and you as concerned in it, your consolation, my friend, and mine, under these abuses must be that we do not deserve them. Let us, as we ever have done, uniformly endeavor the service of our country according to the best of our judgment and abilities, and time will do us justice. Dirt thrown on a mud wall may stick and incorporate, but it will not long adhere to polished marble. Rather than sulking over the lack of appreciation back home for his attempts to prevent the Stamp Act, Franklin redoubled his efforts and launched a battle to bring about its repeal. Besides opposing the act before it was made, I never in my life labored any point more heartily than I did that of obtaining the repeal, he wrote. He also recorded, I was extremely busy attending members of both houses of Parliament, informing, explaining, consulting, disputing, in a continual hurry from morning to night. The infamous act, which Franklin came to call the Mother of Mischief, had formally gone into operation on November 1st, 1765, and it was immediately apparent that the British government had made a mistake. The money lost in trade through American boycotts of English goods was far greater than the revenues that would have been gained had the colonists been willing to purchase the stamps. By December 4th, a group of English merchants who had been trading with the Americans gathered in a London tavern and drew up petitions for the removal of the Stamp Act. They also sent a series of witnesses to testify to the House of Commons regarding the ill effects of this law. Parliament fiercely debated a motion for repeal throughout December and January. Franklin returned to his use of the British newspapers in early 1766 to increase public awareness of the American position. Among the items he caused to be printed were his 1754 letters to Governor William Shirley, which demonstrated that the colonists' resistance to taxation without representation was deeply rooted. As a debate over a repeal of the Stamp Act proceeded, the House of Commons ordered several persons who were considered experts on American affairs to appear and testify on the matter. It was inevitable that one of these witnesses would be Benjamin Franklin. The following excerpts are taken from his testimony given on February 13th in response to questions put by various members of Parliament. Question: Don't you know that the money arising from the stamps was all to be laid out in America? Answer: I know it is appropriated by the Act to the American service, but it will be spent in the conquered colonies where the soldiers are, not in the colonies that pay it. Question: Do you think it right that America should be protected by this country and pay no part of the expense? Answer: That is not the case. The colonists raised, clothed, and paid during the last war nearly 25,000 men and spent many millions. Question: Do not you think the people of America would submit to pay the stamp duty if it were moderated? Answer: No, never, unless compelled by force of arms. Question: What was the temper of America towards Great Britain before the year 1763? Answer: The best in the world. They submitted willingly to the government of the crown and paid, in all their courts, obedience to acts of Parliament. Numerous as the people are in the several provinces, they cost you nothing in forts, citadels, garrisons, or armies to keep them in subjection. They were governed by their country at the expense of only a little pen, ink, and paper. They were led by a threat. They have not only a respect but an affection for Great Britain, for its laws, its customs and manners, and even a fondness for its fashions that greatly increased the commerce. Natives of Britain were always treated with particular regard. To be an old Englishman was of itself a character of some respect, and gave a kind of rank among us. Question: And what is their temper now? Answer: Oh, very much altered. Question: Don't you think they would submit to the Stamp Act if it were modified, the obnoxious parts taken out, and the duty reduced to some particulars of small moment? Answer: No, they will never submit to it. Question: What is your opinion of a future tax imposed on the same principle with that of the Stamp Act? How would the Americans receive it? Answer: Just as they do this, they would not pay it. Question: Have you not heard of the resolutions of this House and of the House of Lords asserting the right of Parliament relating to America, including a power to tax the people there? Answer: Yes, I have heard of such resolutions. Question: What will be the opinion of the Americans on those resolutions? Answer: They will think them unconstitutional and unjust. Question: Was it an opinion in America before 1763 that the Parliament had no right to lay taxes and duties there? Answer: I never heard any objection to the right of laying duties to regulate commerce, but a right to lay internal taxes was never supposed to be in the Parliament, as we are not represented there. Question: But who is the judge of that, Britain or the colony? Answer: Those that field can best judge. Question. You say the colonies have always submitted to external taxes and objects to the right of Parliament only in laying internal taxes. Now can you show that there is any kind of difference between the two taxes to the colony on which they may be laid? Answer. I think the difference is very great. An external tax is a duty laid on commodities imported. That duty is added to the first cost and other charges on the commodity and, when it is offered to sale, makes a part of the price. If the people do not like it at that price, they can refuse it. They are not obliged to pay it. But an internal tax is forced from the people without consent if not laid by their own representatives. The Stamp Act says we shall have no commerce, make no exchange of property with each other, neither purchase nor grant nor recover debts. We shall neither marry nor make our wills unless we pay such and such sums, and thus it is intended to extort out money from us or ruin us by the consequences of refusing to pay it. Question. Can anything less than a military force carry the Stamp Act into execution? Answer. I do not see how a military force can be applied to that purpose. Question. Why may it not? Answer. Suppose a military force sent into America, they will find nobody in arms. What are they then to do? They cannot force a man to take stamps who chooses to do without them. They will not find a rebellion. They may indeed make one. Question. If the act is not repealed, what do you think will be the consequences? A. The total loss of respect and affection the people of America bear to this country, and of all the commerce that depends on that respect and affection. Question. How can the commerce be affected? Answer. You will find that if the act is not repealed, they will take very little of your manufactures in a short time. Question. Is it in their power to do without them? Answer. I think they may very well do without them. Question. Is their interest not to take them? Answer. The goods they take from Britain are either necessaries, mere conveniences, or superfluities. The first, as cloth, etc., was with a little industry they can make at home. The second they can do without till they are able to provide them among themselves. And the last, which are much the greatest part, they will strike off immediately. They are mere articles of fashion, purchased and consumed because the fashion in a respected country, but will now be detested and rejected. Question. Then no regulation with a tax would be submitted to? Answer. Their opinion is that when aids to the crown are wanted, they are to be asked of the several assemblies, according to the old established usage, who will, as always have done, grant them freely, and that their money ought not to be given away without their consent by persons at a distance, unacquainted with their circumstances and abilities. The granting aids to the crown is the only means they have of recommending themselves to their sovereign, and they think it extremely hard and unjust that a body of men in which they have no representatives should make a merit to itself of giving and granting what is not its own, but theirs, and deprive them of a right they esteem of the utmost value and importance, as it is the security of all their other rights. Question. If the Stamp Act should be repealed, would not the Americans think they could just oblige the Parliament to repeal every external tax law now in force? Answer. It is hard to answer questions of what people at such a distance will think. Question. But what do you imagine they will think were the motives of repealing the act? Answer. I suppose they will think that it was repealed from a conviction of its inexpediency, and they will rely upon it that while the same inexpediency subsists, you will never attempt to make such another. As to the internal tax, how small so overlaid by a legislator here on the people, while they have no representatives in this legislature, I think it will never be submitted to. They will oppose it to the last. They do not consider it as at all necessary for you to raise money on them by your taxes, because they are, and always have been, ready to raise money by taxes among themselves, and to grant large sums equal to their abilities upon requisition from the crown. They have not only granted equal to their abilities, but during all the last war they granted far beyond their abilities, and beyond their proportion with this country, you yourselves being judges, and to the amount of many £100,000, and they did freely and readily. Question. But suppose Great Britain should be engaged in a war in Europe, would North America contribute to the support of it? Answer. I do think they would as far as their circumstances would permit. They consider themselves as a part of the British Empire, and as having one common interest with it, they may be looked on here as foreigners, but they do not consider themselves as such. They are zealous for the honor and prosperity of this nation, and, while they are well used, will always be ready to support it as far as their little powers go. Question. Would the repeal of the Stamp Act be any discouragement of your manufacturers? Will the people that have begun to manufacture decline it? Answer. Yes, I think they will. Question. If the Stamp Act should be repealed, would it induce the assemblies of America to acknowledge the rights of Parliament to tax them, and would they erase their resolutions? Answer. No, never. Question. Are there no means of obliging them to erase those resolutions? Answer. None that I know of. They will never do it unless compelled by force of arms. Question. Is there a power on earth that can force them to erase them? Answer. No power, how great soever, can force men to change their opinions. Franklin answered a great many more questions, surprising and deeply impressing the British lawmakers with his wealth of detailed knowledge about conditions in the American provinces. 8 days after his testimony, the House of Commons passed the motion to repeal the Stamp Act. Within 3 more weeks, the bill was carried through the House of Lords and received the assent of the King George III. Although much of the credit for this welcome reversal belongs to the Stamp Act Congress in New York and to the pressures brought by the many English businessmen who had joined in support of the American opposition, there is no doubt that Franklin's testimony exerted a significant influence on Parliament's decision to rescind the hated law. The examination of Dr. Franklin's was published in London, Boston, New York City, Philadelphia, and Williamsburg, and was read widely throughout the provinces. It was also translated and published in German and French. Amid the many celebrations marking the repeal of the Stamp Act and the end of the colonial embargo, Franklin was lavishly honored as a great American hero. And that is the end of chapter 14.